The Mafia boss saw the black, Maid protect his son. What happened next changed everything. Jasmine Carter's heart pounded in her chest as she stood in the hallway, hearing the desperate cries of Marco DeLuca echo through the mansion. She had been the DeLuca family's maid for over a year, and in all that time, she had never seen the little boy in such distress. The sound was heart-wrenching. Every fiber of her being urged her to rush to his side, but she hesitated. She knew she wasn't supposed to enter the nursery without permission. It was strictly forbidden. Vincent DeLuca, the powerful Mafia boss she served, had made it clear that no one was allowed in his son's room without his direct command. Yet, as the cries grew louder, something inside Jasmine snapped. She had seen too much suffering in her own life to let an innocent child endure in silence. Her legs moved before her mind could fully process the decision. She walked down the hallway, each step heavier than the last. When she reached the door, her hand trembled as she placed it on the knob. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, bracing herself for the consequences. But as soon as she opened the door, her heart sank. Marco, barely 5 years old, was lying in his crib, his tiny body racked with sobs. His face was flushed, his hands pressed tightly to his ears in a futile attempt to block out the overwhelming noise around him. The pediatrician had left an hour ago, and the nanny had long since given up. Everyone had tried everything they could think of to calm him down, but nothing worked. Jasmine stepped inside the room, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the sight of the helpless child. She had seen pain before, but this was different. She had lost her own daughter years ago, and the ache of that loss never truly went away. She knew what it felt like to be powerless, to watch someone suffer and not know how to make it stop. Without thinking, she crossed the room to Marco's side, gently lifting him from his crib. She cradled him in her arms, rocking him gently, and began to hum a soft lullaby, the same one she used to sing to her daughter. Slowly, Marco's sobs began to subside. His breathing steadied, and the tension in his little body began to relax. Jasmine could feel the warmth of his body against hers, and in that moment, everything else faded away. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was able to breathe again. But just as she began to feel a sense of relief, the door to the nursery creaked open. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Standing in the doorway was Vincent DeLuca, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. He had been watching from the doorway, his gaze calculating. Jasmine felt a wave of panic wash over her. She knew she was in trouble. But then, to her surprise, Vincent didn't say a word. He just stood there, silently observing. Jasmine held Marco a little closer, unsure of what to expect. Vincent's gaze softened, just slightly, as he watched the child calm in Jasmine's arms. It was a moment that seemed to stretch on forever. She could see the slight furrow in his brow, the internal conflict behind his stoic expression. But he didn't move. For a brief moment, there was silence between them. Jasmine's voice trembled as she spoke, barely above a whisper. "He needed comfort," she said, her words breaking the tension in the room. Vincent didn't respond immediately. He just continued to watch her, his dark eyes flicking between her and Marco. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. "You're not supposed to be in here." Jasmine flinched at his words, the weight of his authority pressing down on her. But before she could say anything else, Vincent took a step forward. His hand reached out, and for a moment, she feared the worst. Instead, he gently placed his hand on Marco's small head. The gesture was surprisingly tender. "You've done something no one else could," Vincent said, his voice softer now, with a hint of something else, something Jasmine couldn't quite place. She blinked, confused by the sudden shift in his demeanor. For a moment, it felt as though she was seeing a side of him that no one else had ever witnessed. He glanced at her once more, his gaze lingering, before speaking again. "I'm not angry, but don't let anyone else know about this." Jasmine nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had expected anger, punishment, something to come down hard on her for breaking the rules. But instead, she had been met with understanding, a rare and unexpected reaction from the man who controlled everything in his world. As Vincent turned to leave, he paused at the door, glancing back at her. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words carrying a weight Jasmine hadn't anticipated. With that, he was gone, leaving Jasmine alone in the room with Marco, her heart racing as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. She looked down at the little boy in her arms, now peacefully asleep, And for the first time since she'd arrived at the DeLuca estate, she felt a small, fleeting sense of hope. Jasmine Carter stood in the nursery, Marco DeLuca still cradled in her arms, as the seconds seemed to stretch into eternity. The silence that followed Vincent DeLuca's unexpected departure was deafening. Her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on her. She had been prepared for anger, for punishment, but instead, she had received something far more confusing: understanding, perhaps even gratitude. It was unlike anything she had ever expected from the powerful Mafia boss who ruled this estate with an iron fist. She shifted her gaze down to the sleeping child in her arms, his tiny body finally at peace. The storm that had raged within him just moments before had calmed, and with it, her own heart seemed to quiet. But as she stood there, holding Marco, something inside her stirred. She had crossed a line, something she knew she shouldn't have done. But now, with Vincent's strange reaction to her actions, she found herself wondering if perhaps she had done the right thing. The fear she had felt moments ago began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet sense of pride. She had helped him. She had helped Marco. It was a feeling Jasmine hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Her life had been spent in the shadows, working tirelessly for the DeLuca family, never questioning the rules, never stepping out of line. She had always believed that she was just a servant, a face in the background, someone who was meant to remain unseen. But tonight, for the first time, she had made a difference. She glanced at the door, half expecting Vincent to return, but the room remained still, the only sound being Marco's soft, steady breathing. She wasn't sure what to do next. It was rare for her to be alone with the child for this long. Usually, one of the other staff members, or even Vincent's wife, Maria, would handle him. But tonight, it was just her. And in that moment, she realized how much she had come to care for the little boy in her arms. He was more than just the boss's son. He was innocent, pure, a reminder of everything she had lost in her own life. Jasmine closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of her daughter, who had died so many years ago. The ache in her chest never truly went away. It was a wound that time had never healed, a reminder of the life she had once had and the family she had lost. As Marco stirred slightly in her arms, Jasmine's thoughts shifted back to the present. She looked down at him again, feeling a deep sense of responsibility for his well-being. She had always known that her role in the DeLuca family was to serve, to be there when needed, but never to stand out. Yet tonight, something had changed. She wasn't sure what to make of it, but she knew that whatever it was, it had altered her relationship with Vincent. She had seen him at his most vulnerable, watching her with those dark, calculating eyes, but also something else. There was something beneath the cold exterior, something human, something she had never expected to find in him. Jasmine gently shifted Marco in her arms, cradling him a little more securely. She knew that the next few days would be crucial. Vincent had given her no indication of what would happen next, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the dynamic between them. She had broken the rules, and yet, instead of punishment, she had received something far more complicated, an unspoken bond. With a deep breath, Jasmine made her way to the crib and gently placed Marco down, making sure he was comfortable. She stood there for a moment, watching the peaceful rise and fall of his chest. In that silence, she could almost hear the whispers of her past, reminding her of everything she had sacrificed, everything she had lost. But as she turned to leave the room, a quiet voice interrupted her thoughts. Jasmine. She froze. Vincent's voice was low and steady, filled with an authority that she had come to expect from him. She turned slowly, finding him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He was watching her closely, his gaze sharp, but there was something else there, something that made her feel like she was seeing him for the first time. Thank you, he said, his voice soft, but carrying a weight that made Jasmine's heart skip a beat. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to explain the bond she felt with Marco or the fear that had gripped her when she had crossed into his room. Instead, she simply nodded, unable to find the right words. Vincent took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. You did what I couldn't, he said, his voice almost a whisper. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Jasmine felt a rush of emotion wash over her. This was not what she had expected. This was not the Vincent she had come to know. This was a man who, for the first time, seemed human. He turned to leave, but before he stepped out the door, he paused and looked back at her. "I don't want you to feel like you're just a maid here," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You're more than that. Never forget that." Jasmine watched him leave, her heart racing, her mind spinning. She had never expected this. She had never expected to hear such words from Vincent DeLuca, a man who had always treated her as little more than a servant. But now, she found herself wondering if this was just the beginning of something bigger, something that could change everything for both of them. Jasmine Carter had always been an invisible figure in the DeLuca household, blending into the background as she performed her duties without ever drawing attention to herself. But since that night, when she had stepped in to comfort Marco, something had shifted. Vincent DeLuca's words lingered in her mind. "You're more than that." She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had taken a new direction, one she had never anticipated. She had always known her place in the world of the powerful DeLuca family. As a maid, she was to be seen and not heard, to serve without question, to obey without hesitation. But tonight, Vincent had looked at her differently, and for the first time, she felt like she had a purpose beyond her role as an employee. The next few days passed in a blur. Jasmine tried to focus on her tasks, keeping her head down and sticking to the routines she knew so well. But it was hard to ignore the weight of Vincent's words. Every time she passed him in the hall, his eyes seemed to follow her, his gaze filled with something she couldn't quite understand. It wasn't like before. Before, he had treated her with distant indifference, as though she were nothing more than a fixture in the house. But now, there was an unspoken acknowledgement between them, a shift in the way he regarded her. She wasn't sure what to make of it. Was it just a fleeting moment, or was there something more? One afternoon, as Jasmine was cleaning the study, she heard the soft click of the door opening behind her. She turned around to find Vincent standing there, his presence filling the room. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze was intense, focused on her. "Jasmine," he said, his voice steady but carrying an undertone she hadn't heard before. "I need to speak with you." Her heart skipped a beat. She set the cleaning supplies down and straightened, unsure of what to expect. "Of course, Mr. DeLuca," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent took a step into the room, closing the door behind him. The tension between them was palpable, and Jasmine could feel her pulse quicken. "I've been thinking about what happened the other night," he began, his voice softening slightly. "And I wanted to thank you again." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to bring it up again, and the fact that he had only made her more aware of the weight of his gratitude. "It was nothing, sir," she said quickly, lowering her gaze to the floor. "I was just trying to help." "You did more than that," Vincent said, his tone firm now. "You did something no one else in this house would have done. You took care of Marco when no one else could." Jasmine hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She had never been one to accept praise, especially from someone like Vincent DeLuca. But the way he was looking at her, the way his words seemed to carry so much weight, made her feel as though she were seeing him for the first time. He wasn't just the cold, powerful mafia boss who controlled everything around him. In this moment, he seemed human. "I didn't do anything special," Jasmine said quietly, still avoiding his gaze. "I just did what I thought was right." Vincent studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face as though trying to uncover something she hadn't said. "You're wrong," he said finally. "You did something more than just right. You showed something that's rare in this world, compassion. And that's something I respect." Jasmine felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't about her. It was about Marco, about the family she served, about the rules she had to follow. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. "But I'm just here to do my job." "You're doing more than that," Vincent replied, his voice low and steady. "And I want you to know that I'm not blind to it." He turned to leave, but before he stepped out the door, he paused and looked back at her. "You've earned my respect, Jasmine. Don't forget that." And with that, he was gone. Jasmine stood there, her mind reeling. She couldn't quite process what had just happened. Vincent DeLuca had just said that he respected her. Her, a simple maid who had spent most of her life trying to remain unnoticed. She had never expected to hear those words from him, never imagined that she would have any kind of impact on the powerful man who ran the DeLuca empire. And yet, here she was, standing in the aftermath of a moment that had shifted everything. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Jasmine went through the motions, completing her tasks as usual, but her thoughts kept drifting back to that moment in the study. What did it mean? Had Vincent really seen her for who she was? Or was this just another passing gesture, something that would fade with time? As the evening approached, Jasmine found herself standing in the kitchen, staring out the window at the sprawling estate. She had always felt like an outsider here, like she didn't belong in a world so far, removed from her own. But now, for the first time, she wasn't sure anymore. She had crossed a line, yes, but perhaps that line wasn't as clear-cut as she had once thought. She had done something that had changed Vincent's perception of her, something that had forced him to acknowledge her in a way he never had before. And for the first time, Jasmine wondered if perhaps there was more to her life in this mansion than just being a maid. Maybe, just maybe, there was something more waiting for her, something that would change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The days that followed were a blur for Jasmine Carter. The unexpected words from Vincent DeLuca still echoed in her mind, making it difficult for her to focus on the routine tasks that had always filled her days. She had worked in the DeLuca mansion for over a year, and yet, nothing had ever felt this different. Vincent had respected her. A simple maid, someone who had always stayed in the background, always obeyed without question. But now, something had changed. Every time she crossed paths with him, there was a flicker of something more in his gaze. It wasn't the cold, calculating look he usually reserved for everyone else. No, this was something else. Something warmer, though still distant. It left Jasmine wondering if this shift in their relationship was something temporary, or if it was the start of a new chapter in her life. She had never allowed herself to dream of such things. She had never thought that someone like Vincent DeLuca, a man of such power, could see her as anything more than a servant. But the words he had spoken to her that day were like a spark, something that had ignited a fire within her. She had done something no one else could do. Comforted Marco, made him feel safe in his most vulnerable moment. And Vincent had noticed. It was almost too much for her to grasp. Jasmine had spent so long being invisible, going unnoticed in the grand scheme of the DeLuca empire, that now, with Vincent's acknowledgement, she felt as though she were standing in the spotlight for the first time. It was both thrilling and terrifying. Over the next few days, Vincent kept his distance, but Jasmine could sense his presence more than ever. Every time they passed each other in the hallways, his eyes would linger just a moment longer than they used to. There was a new tension between them, one that Jasmine didn't know how to navigate. She wasn't used to this, the attention, the unspoken connection. But despite the uncertainty, there was a part of her that welcomed it. A part of her that had longed to be seen for who she truly was, not just the woman who cleaned the floors and cooked the meals. She had spent her entire life being overlooked, and now, it felt as if Vincent saw her for the first time. One afternoon, as Jasmine was dusting the grand library, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She glanced up, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Vincent standing in the doorway. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his expression unreadable as always, but his eyes, those dark eyes, were focused entirely on her. "Jasmine," he said, his voice steady but carrying an edge of something more. "I need you to come with me. There's something I want to show you." His tone was not one she could easily ignore. She felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach, but she quickly masked it. "Of course, Mr. DeLuca," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. She set down the duster and followed him as he led her down the long hallway, through the mansion's vast corridors. She had no idea where he was taking her, but she knew one thing. This was unlike anything that had happened before. When they reached the library's private office, Vincent motioned for her to sit. He closed the door behind them and stood by the desk, looking at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "I've been thinking about what you did for Marco," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You showed him compassion when no one else could. That means something to me." Jasmine shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The weight of his words was heavy, and she wasn't sure how to respond. "I only did what I thought was right," she said quietly. "It was the least I could do for him." Vincent studied her for a moment, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. "No," he said, shaking his head slightly. "You did more than that. You stepped into a situation no one else dared to handle, and you didn't hesitate. That's not something I take lightly." The sincerity in his words caught her off guard. It made her feel like she was more than just a maid, more than just someone who followed orders. For the first time, she felt like Vincent saw her as an individual, someone with strength and courage. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "I don't say this often, but you've earned my respect, Jasmine." His words seemed to hang in the air between them. Jasmine couldn't quite process what was happening. She had never been one to seek praise, especially not from someone like Vincent. But the fact that he was giving her this acknowledgement, it made her feel seen in a way she had never felt before. She had always been content to blend into the background, to stay out of the spotlight. But now, it seemed as though Vincent was forcing her to step into it. And though the idea terrified her, there was a part of her that couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. "I'm not asking for anything in return," Vincent continued, his gaze still fixed on her. "But I want you to know that I'm aware of your actions. And I appreciate them." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat as she processed his words. This was more than she had ever expected. She had always kept her head down, never seeking recognition, never wanting to disrupt the order of things. But now, for some reason, Vincent seemed to see her as someone worthy of more than just his orders. She felt something stir inside her, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. It was hope. Hope that, maybe, she could be more than just the maid in the DeLuca house. Maybe, just maybe, there was something more for her here. As Vincent turned to leave, he glanced back at her. "I trust you," he said quietly. "Don't forget that." And with that, he left the room, leaving Jasmine to sit in the silence of his words. She stared at the door for a long moment, the weight of the situation settling over her. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life was no longer the same. The days after that conversation in the private office with Vincent DeLuca felt like a blur for Jasmine Carter. She had spent the majority of her time trying to process the weight of his words. "You've earned my respect." To hear that from someone like Vincent, a man who never showed weakness, never gave anything freely, had shaken her to the core. Every day, as she continued her work at the mansion, she kept thinking back to that moment. Vincent had not only acknowledged her actions, he had praised them. It was the kind of recognition Jasmine had never expected to receive, and it left her questioning everything she had believed about her place in the DeLuca household. She wasn't just a maid anymore. Or at least, that was how it felt. The way Vincent looked at her now was different. There was something in his eyes, something that wasn't there before, and it made her heart race every time their paths crossed. At first, she had tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just a shift in perception. But as the days went by, it became clearer. Vincent DeLuca saw her. Really saw her. And that was something Jasmine wasn't sure how to handle. It was a warm spring afternoon when Vincent asked her to meet him again. She had just finished cleaning the kitchen, wiping down the counters, and organizing the silverware when she heard his voice calling from the hallway. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low and commanding. "In my office." Her heart skipped a beat as she wiped her hands on her apron. This was the third time in a week he had asked to speak with her alone. She wasn't sure what to make of it, but she couldn't help the growing sense of anticipation. She walked down the hallway, her steps slow and measured, unsure of what she would find when she entered the office. When she arrived, Vincent was standing by the large window, looking out over the estate. He didn't turn when he heard her footsteps. Instead, he spoke without looking at her. "Jasmine," he began, his tone thoughtful, "I've been thinking." His words hung in the air for a moment before he finally turned to face her. His dark eyes were intense, focused on her. "You've been with the DeLuca family for a long time," he said, his gaze scanning her face as if searching for something. "And in that time, you've earned more than just your place here. You've earned my trust." Jasmine's heart began to race, her breath catching in her throat. His words, his respect, it was all too much to take in. She had always believed she was just another part of the background, another face in the crowd. But now, Vincent was telling her that she had earned something more. Something that not even most people in his world could claim. "You've seen things here," Vincent continued, his voice steady but carrying a weight of seriousness. "Things most people wouldn't understand. You've been loyal, dependable. But there's something more." He took a step closer to her, his expression softening, though there was still a sharp edge to his gaze. "I need someone I can trust, Jasmine. Someone who understands what's at stake. I've been watching you, and I believe you're the one." Jasmine blinked, confused. "The one?" she repeated softly, not sure if she had heard him correctly. Yes, Vincent said, his voice low and earnest. I want you to work more closely with me, Jasmine. Not just as a maid, but as someone who can help me. There are things I can't handle on my own. Things I need your insight on. Jasmine felt a flutter in her chest at his words. She had never imagined she would be in a position like this. A position where Vincent DeLuca, the head of a powerful Mafia family, was asking for her help. She had spent so long being the one who quietly served, never asking questions, never drawing attention to herself. But now, here she was, being offered a chance to be more than just an invisible servant. I don't know what to say, Jasmine stammered, unsure of how to respond. Vincent's lips curled into a slight smile. You don't have to say anything yet, he said. I just want you to know that this is a possibility. A possibility for both of us. The weight of his words settled heavily in the room, and for a moment, there was a long silence between them. Jasmine's mind was racing, torn between disbelief and curiosity. She had never imagined this kind of opportunity would present itself to her. And yet, here it was, right in front of her. Vincent DeLuca was offering her more than just a job. He was offering her a role in his world. A role that could change everything. Take your time to think about it, Vincent added, his voice gentle now, as if sensing her uncertainty. But know that when you're ready, I'll be here. He turned to walk toward the desk, leaving Jasmine standing there, overwhelmed by the weight of his offer. As she left the office, her thoughts swirled around her. She had always known the DeLuca family was powerful, but she had never imagined being part of that power. Was she ready for something like this? Could she really step into a world so far removed from the one she had known? The next few days were a whirlwind of confusion and contemplation. Jasmine's mind kept returning to Vincent's words, to the opportunity he had given her. She had always wanted more, but was she truly ready to take that step? Every time she passed him in the hallway, their eyes would meet, and for a moment, she could feel the unspoken tension between them. It was a connection that neither of them had expected, but it was undeniable. Finally, after much soul-searching, Jasmine made her decision. She couldn't stay in the shadows forever. It was time to take a chance, and when Vincent called for her again, she would be ready. Jasmine Carter had always been the quiet observer, the one who stayed in the background, doing her job and never asking for anything more. But as she stood there in the hallway, the weight of her decision hung heavily in the air. Vincent DeLuca had given her an opportunity, one she never could have imagined. He had seen her, acknowledged her, and now he was offering her a role in his world, a world she had only glimpsed from afar. It was a world of power, danger, and secrets, a world she had always stayed away from. But now, she was about to step into it. Jasmine took a deep breath and walked toward the office. The anticipation in her chest felt like a storm, a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't quite sort through. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but as she approached the door, her heart began to race. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a turning point. When she entered the office, Vincent was standing by the window again, just as he had been the first time they spoke. His posture was relaxed, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made her feel like she was the only one in the room. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick with anticipation, and Jasmine couldn't help but wonder what was going through Vincent's mind. He had always been so controlled, so guarded. But now, there was a different kind of tension. Jasmine, he finally said, his voice steady and firm, I'm glad you came. She nodded, trying to steady the nerves that had settled in her stomach. You said you wanted to talk, she replied, her voice quiet but confident. Vincent's eyes softened slightly, but there was still a sharpness to his gaze. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day, he said, and I think it's time we take the next step. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. The next step? She had no idea what he meant, but the way he said it made her realize that this was more than just an offer. It was a challenge. What do you mean? She asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. Vincent took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I want you to help me with something, he said, his voice lowering. I need someone I can trust to handle things for me. Someone who can think on their feet. Someone who isn't afraid to make tough decisions. Jasmine's mind raced as she processed his words. He was asking her to do something big. She had never imagined herself in a position like this. She was just a maid, a a servant, someone who had always been overlooked. And now, Vincent was offering her a role in his world, a role that could change everything. I don't know if I'm the right person for this, Jasmine said, her voice hesitant. I've never done anything like that before. Vincent studied her for a long moment, his eyes flicking over her face as if he were searching for something. You've already proven you can handle more than you think, he said, his voice low and reassuring. You showed that when you took care of Marco. You didn't hesitate, even when the situation was difficult. That's exactly what I need. Jasmine felt a wave of warmth wash over her at his words, but she still wasn't sure. She had always played it safe, never stepping out of line. The thought of being involved in Vincent's world, a world of power and danger, both terrified and excited her. What exactly do you want me to do? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent took a step back, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked out the window. I need someone to help me with business matters, he said, his voice steady. Someone who can handle things behind the scenes. There are decisions that need to be made, deals that need to be worked out, and I need someone I can trust to take care of them. Jasmine's head spun as she tried to wrap her mind around his words. This wasn't just a job. This was something else entirely. Are you asking me to work for you? She asked, her voice still filled with disbelief. Vincent turned back to face her, his expression serious. I'm asking you to step up, Jasmine. I'm asking you to be part of something bigger than yourself. The weight of his words hit her like a ton of bricks. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this. But at the same time, something inside her, something she had buried for so long, began to stir. She had always wanted more, wanted to be seen for who she truly was. And now, Vincent was offering her a chance to prove herself. A chance to be more than just a maid. A chance to be someone who mattered. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady, despite the uncertainty swirling inside her. Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he were weighing her decision. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. Good, he said. I knew you had it in you. Jasmine's heart raced as she realized what she had just agreed to. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. This was the beginning of something new, something that would change her life forever. But for the first time in a long time, Jasmine felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Jasmine Carter's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. After agreeing to work more closely with Vincent DeLuca, she found herself thrust into a new world, one filled with responsibility, tension, and challenges she had never faced before. The transition was anything but easy. Each day, as she went about her usual duties, she couldn't help but feel the weight of Vincent's trust in her. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone he depended on, someone he saw as an equal. And that thought, while comforting, was also terrifying. There was an unease in her heart every time she stepped into the study to meet Vincent. It wasn't just the magnitude of the decisions they would make together. It was the growing connection between them, something she didn't fully understand. She had never seen herself as anything more than a servant. But now, with every passing day, she felt something new stirring inside her. Vincent had made her feel seen, valued, something she had never experienced before in her life. But with that recognition came a sense of vulnerability she hadn't anticipated. One morning, as she was sorting through paperwork in the study, she heard the door open behind her. She turned, her heart racing, and found Vincent standing in the doorway, his gaze fixed on her. There was a new intensity in his eyes, something more than just the professional distance they had kept in the past. He looked at her as though he was seeing her for the first time, and it made her feel exposed, yet somehow empowered. Jasmine, he said, his voice steady, but there was a warmth to it she hadn't heard before. I need your help with something important. Her pulse quickened at his words. She had learned quickly that when Vincent needed her for something, it was never a small matter. Of course, Mr. DeLuca, she replied, standing up from the desk. What do you need? Vincent stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He didn't sit, but instead walked around the room, his presence commanding the space. Jasmine stood still, her hands clasped in front of her as she waited for him to speak. I've been thinking about the direction the family business is headed, he began, his voice low and deliberate. There are decisions that need to be made, and I want your insight on them. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Vincent wanted her opinion? It was an overwhelming thought, one that made her question her place in this world. She had spent so long being invisible, never questioning the orders she was given. But now, Vincent was treating her as an equal, asking for her input. "What kind of decisions?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "There are a few people within the organization I'm concerned about," Vincent said, his eyes narrowing. "I need someone who can look at things from an outside perspective, someone who isn't clouded by the history of the family. I need you to help me make the right choices." Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. This was not what she had expected when she agreed to work more closely with Vincent. She had thought she would be running errands, assisting with small tasks. But now, he was asking her to make decisions that could impact the future of his empire. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," Jasmine said, her voice faltering. "I've never had to make decisions like this before." Vincent stopped in his tracks and turned to face her. There was a sharpness in his gaze, but also a depth of understanding. "You don't need to have all the answers, Jasmine. I trust your judgment. I trust you." His words hit her harder than she had expected. Vincent DeLuca, a man who controlled so much, who made decisions that affected countless lives, was telling her that he trusted her. It was a powerful statement, and Jasmine couldn't deny the effect it had on her. For the first time, she felt like she was part of something bigger, something that could change her life. She had always been told what to do, always followed orders without question. But now, Vincent was offering her a chance to shape her own path, to become something more than just a maid. "I'll do it," Jasmine said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. Vincent's eyes softened as he took a step closer to her. "I knew I could count on you," he said, his voice low. "We'll work together on this. You'll have my back, and I'll have yours." Jasmine nodded, feeling a sense of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. Vincent turned to leave, but before he reached the door, he paused and looked back at her. "Jasmine," he said, his voice serious, "whatever happens next, remember this. Your loyalty is more valuable to me than anything else." His words resonated deeply within her, and as the door closed behind him, she stood there in the quiet room, trying to process everything that had just happened. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Vincent DeLuca had entrusted her with something she had never expected. She was no longer just a maid. She was a part of something far greater than herself, and it was up to her to decide where that would take her. Jasmine had never imagined a moment like this. The quiet life she had led, one built on routine and invisibility, was now a distant memory. Every day, as she moved through the DeLuca estate, there was a weight in the air, an unspoken understanding that something had changed. She was no longer just a maid. She was part of something bigger, something more significant, and Vincent DeLuca had made it clear that he needed her. But with that came a sense of responsibility she hadn't prepared for. The trust he had placed in her was not something she could take lightly. As the days passed, Vincent and Jasmine continued to meet, discussing plans, making decisions, and navigating the intricacies of the DeLuca empire. Vincent was always sharp, always calculating, but Jasmine had started to notice something else in his demeanor. There was a respect in his eyes when he looked at her. It wasn't just professional, it was personal. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, she had crossed the line from being a servant to being someone Vincent relied on. And that realization both thrilled and terrified her. She spent her nights lying awake, thinking about what Vincent had said, how he trusted her, how he valued her. She had always kept her head down, never expecting to be seen as anything more than a worker in the background. But now, everything was different. She had a role to play in Vincent's world, and it wasn't just as someone who cleaned and cooked. It was as someone who was helping shape the future of the DeLuca family. That night, as she prepared for bed, there was a knock at her door. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door cautiously and found Vincent standing there, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Jasmine," he said, his voice steady. "I need you to come with me. There's something I want to show you." Her pulse quickened, but she nodded. "Of course, Mr. DeLuca." Without saying another word, Vincent turned and led the way down the hallway. Jasmine followed closely behind, her mind racing. Where was he taking her? What did he need to show her? They reached a door she had never noticed before, tucked away at the end of the hall. Vincent opened it and motioned for her to enter. The room was small, dimly lit, but there was something in the air that felt different. As Jasmine stepped inside, She realized that this wasn't just a random room. It was a private office, one that Vincent clearly used for more confidential matters. He closed the door behind them, his eyes locking with hers. "I need you to understand something, Jasmine," Vincent said, his voice low. "This family, this business, it's not just about power or money. It's about loyalty. It's about trust. And I'm putting that trust in you." Jasmine's heart raced as his words sank in. She had known that her involvement in Vincent's world was different, but hearing him say it so directly made everything feel even more real. "I'm ready," she said quietly, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was agreeing to. Vincent's gaze softened, but only slightly. "I know you are. But this is more than just decisions about the family business. This is about everything. About protecting what we have, about ensuring that we remain in control. And I need you to help me do that." Jasmine's mind was spinning. She had always thought of herself as an outsider, someone who had no stake in the DeLuca empire. But now, Vincent was asking her to help protect it, to be part of the inner workings of something far greater than herself. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice steady, though her mind was still processing everything. Vincent nodded, his eyes searching hers. "I know you won't," he said, "and I'm counting on you." The weight of his words settled on her shoulders like a mantle. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was part of something important. As she left the room, she felt a strange sense of resolve, as though she had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had a place in it. A place beside Vincent DeLuca, a place in the world of power and influence that he controlled. She couldn't turn back now, and she didn't want to. Jasmine Carter's days had become a blur of constant activity since Vincent DeLuca had entrusted her with more responsibility. Every step she took within the DeLuca mansion felt heavier than the last, the weight of Vincent's trust sitting on her shoulders like a silent command. She wasn't sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, she had gone from being just another servant to becoming a key part of the DeLuca family's inner circle. She had always been invisible, but now, for the first time in her life, she was seen, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. The role Vincent had given her was unlike anything she had ever imagined. She was no longer just managing the day-to-day chores of the mansion. No, now she was making decisions that affected the family's future. The responsibility was daunting, but every time she walked into the study to meet Vincent, something inside her stirred. There was a part of her that thrived under the pressure, that wanted to prove she could handle it, that wanted to show Vincent that he had made the right choice in trusting her. However, there was another part of her that hesitated, unsure of the magnitude of the world she had just entered. The world of power, influence, and danger. She wasn't naive. She had seen the way Vincent operated, how his decisions could change lives in an instant. But still, it felt surreal that she was now part of those decisions. One evening, as Jasmine was finishing up her duties, she was called to the study again. It had become a familiar routine, but tonight felt different. The air was thick with anticipation as she entered the room. Vincent was seated at his desk, his usual calm demeanor in place, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her heart race. "Jasmine," he said, his voice steady, "I need your help with something." She swallowed, her nerves rising, but she stood tall and nodded. "Of course, Mr. DeLuca." Vincent looked up from the papers in front of him, his gaze unwavering. "There are people I trust," he said slowly, "and then there are people I need to trust more." Jasmine felt the weight of his words, but she didn't flinch. She had been placed in this position because of her ability to stay calm under pressure. She couldn't let her nerves show now. "What do you need from me?" she asked, her voice steady. Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly, his lips curling into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I need you to make a choice, Jasmine," he said. "A choice that could change everything for the DeLuca family." The room seemed to close in around her as his words hung in the air. A choice? She had made plenty of choices before, but none like this. She wasn't just being asked to perform a task. She was being asked to make a decision that would affect the very future of the family she had come to serve. "I'm listening," she said, her voice calm despite the rising tension in her chest. Vincent stood and walked around the desk, stopping just a few feet in front of her. His presence was commanding, but there was something more now, something personal. "There is a man, a business partner, who has been giving me trouble," he said quietly. "He's been playing both sides, working with other families behind my back. I've tried to handle it discreetly, but it's time to make a move. Jasmine's pulse quickened. The weight of his words was sinking in. This wasn't just about business. This was about loyalty and betrayal. It was about the power dynamics within the DeLuca empire. What do you want me to do? She asked, her mind racing with possibilities. I need you to help me decide how to handle him, Vincent said. You've shown me that you can think critically, that you can see things from a perspective others don't. He took a deep breath, as if weighing his next words. I trust you to help me decide whether this man can be saved or whether he needs to be eliminated. Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest. Eliminate him? The words hung in the air, their implications heavy and dark. She wasn't a stranger to the dangerous world Vincent inhabited, but hearing him speak so plainly about it felt different now that she was involved. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was part of this. Jasmine began, but she struggled to find the right words. What was she supposed to say? How? Was she supposed to make a decision like this? She had never been trained for this kind of life, never imagined she would be part of it. Vincent's gaze softened slightly as he studied her. I know this is difficult, he said quietly, but I'm giving you this choice because I believe in you. You have the ability to see the bigger picture. I need you to decide what's best for us. Jasmine took a deep breath. The decision wasn't just about the business. It wasn't even about the man in question. It was about her place in this world, the world she had been thrust into. She was no longer just a maid. She was part of something far greater, and the weight of that responsibility was beginning to feel overwhelming. She looked at Vincent, his dark eyes watching her carefully, waiting for her response. This was the moment. She had to decide. She had to choose. And she realized that this was the moment that would define her future. With a steady breath, Jasmine made her choice. I'll do it, she said, her voice firm. I'll help you decide. Vincent nodded, a small but appreciative smile crossing his face. I knew I could count on you, he said. And in that moment, Jasmine understood. This was just the beginning. The world she had stepped into was far more complex than she had ever imagined, but she was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with an overwhelming sense of purpose and uncertainty for Jasmine Carter. Vincent DeLuca had given her a responsibility that she had never expected, and now she was a part of a world far beyond the realm she had once known. Every time she stepped into the study to meet Vincent, she could feel the gravity of the decisions they were making together. He trusted her, more than anyone else in the family, more than anyone in his life, and that trust was something she couldn't afford to take lightly. She spent her nights thinking about what Vincent had asked her to do. The man he had mentioned, the one who had betrayed him, was someone who had been working against the DeLuca family for months, and now, the question of what to do with him loomed over her. Eliminate him or give him a chance. It was a question that kept her awake, tossing and turning, unsure of which path would be the right one. She had never been part of these kinds of decisions before, but Vincent had placed her at the center of it all. In a way, she had become a part of his world, a world that was far more dangerous and complicated than she had ever imagined. As the days went by, Jasmine found herself in deeper conversations with Vincent, discussing strategies, examining the loyalty of their associates, and even dealing with matters she never thought she would be involved in. She had become an extension of his thoughts, a trusted advisor. And with that role came new challenges. One evening, as she was finishing a meeting with Vincent, he stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling estate. She could see the tension in his posture, the weight of the decisions he had to make. You've been doing well, Jasmine, he said, his voice calm but filled with a weight she had come to recognize. I need you to be ready for what's coming next. There are forces at play that you can't ignore. Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard the rumors, the whispers about power struggles and family politics. She had always kept her distance from the DeLuca family's business, but now, it was impossible to stay away. What do you mean? She asked, her voice steady despite the unease building inside her. Vincent turned to face her, his eyes intense, his gaze unwavering. There are people in this family, Jasmine, who would do anything to take control, he said, his voice lowering. I need to know where your loyalty lies. The question hung in the air, heavy and serious. Jasmine's heart beat faster, but she didn't hesitate. She had made her choice when she agreed to help Vincent. I'm with you, she said firmly, her voice carrying the conviction she felt in her heart. Vincent studied her for a long moment. as if weighing her words, before he nodded. Good, he said, his voice softening just a bit. Because what's coming next will require everything we have. As the days continued to pass, Jasmine's role within the DeLuca family deepened. She worked side by side with Vincent, helping him navigate the delicate balance of power that kept the family's empire intact. The challenges were constant, but so was the feeling of purpose that grew within her. She had a place now, one that was undeniable, one that she had earned. And yet, with every decision she made, every step she took, she felt the weight of what she was becoming. Vincent's influence had changed her life, but it had also changed how she saw the world. She was no longer just the invisible maid in the background. She was someone who had power, someone who had a say in what happened next. But with that came a price. There was always a cost. One afternoon, Vincent called her to his office once more. When she entered, she found him seated behind his desk, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression unreadable. "Jasmine," he said, his tone serious. "It's time to make the final decision." Jasmine's pulse quickened as she stepped closer. "The man who has been betraying us," Vincent continued. "You need to decide. We can't afford to let him drag us down any longer." Jasmine's stomach tightened. This was the moment. The decision she had been avoiding had come to a head. She had to choose. Eliminate him or find a way to work with him. There was no middle ground. She felt the weight of it pressing on her chest, but she had made her choice long ago. She had chosen Vincent, and that meant loyalty. "He's a liability," Jasmine said quietly, her voice steady. "We can't let him live." Vincent's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the air between them felt thick with the gravity of her words. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice softer now. "This is not an easy choice." Jasmine nodded, feeling a calm resolve wash over her. "I'm sure. We can't afford to be weak now." Vincent stood and walked around the desk, coming to stand beside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of reassurance. "I knew I could count on you," he said, his voice filled with pride. Jasmine looked up at him, meeting his gaze. She had made her choice, and now there was no turning back. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice firm. "Now, we move forward," Vincent said, his tone shifting back to its usual intensity. Together, as she left the office, Jasmine felt a mixture of emotions. The choice she had made was final, and it would have consequences. But in that moment, she also felt more connected to Vincent than ever before. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was an integral part of the DeLuca family, and that was something she never could have imagined when she first stepped into this world. The following weeks were a blur of decisions and developments for Jasmine Carter. Every step she took within the DeLuca estate felt more significant than the last. She wasn't just following orders anymore. She was actively shaping the future of the family's empire, working side by side with Vincent DeLuca, a man she had once seen as nothing more than a distant figure of power. Now, he was her confidant, her partner in navigating the world they both inhabited, and each new day brought her closer to the man she had become, someone who no longer shied away from responsibility, but embraced it with determination. The trust Vincent had placed in her had shifted something deep within her. It wasn't just about the tasks or the work that needed to be done anymore. It was about the choices they made together, the weight of those choices, and the knowledge that, as much as Vincent guided her, she was also guiding him. It was a strange, almost surreal feeling. In a world where loyalty was everything, Jasmine had earned something far greater than just a role. She had earned Vincent's trust, his respect, and perhaps more than that, a place in his world. As they moved forward, she began to see things from his perspective. It wasn't just about decisions of business, family, or even survival. It was about the balance of power, the constant need to maintain control and to protect what they had worked so hard to build. It wasn't easy, and it never would be, but Jasmine was starting to understand what Vincent had known all along. That power wasn't something you simply had. It was something you fought for, every single day. One evening, after a long day of meetings and discussions, Vincent asked Jasmine to join him in the study. She had become accustomed to these quiet meetings, but tonight felt different. The air in the room was charged, thick with anticipation. Jasmine walked into the study, her mind racing with questions, unsure of what to expect. As she entered, she found Vincent standing by the window, his back to her. "Jasmine," he said, his voice calm but with an undertone of something deeper, Something urgent. Come in. I need to talk to you about something. She nodded, stepping forward, but her heart was already beginning to beat faster. She had learned by now that Vincent's words were never casual. They always held weight. He turned around, his face unreadable, but his eyes sharp as ever. There's been a shift, he said, his gaze fixed on hers. A shift in the power structure. Some of our associates are making moves. Some of them are trying to challenge us. And we need to be prepared. Jasmine's stomach tightened. She had seen the undercurrents of tension within the family, the shifting loyalties, the quiet whispers behind closed doors. It was always there, beneath the surface, like a storm waiting to break. But hearing Vincent speak so directly about it made everything feel far more real. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice steady, though she could feel the uncertainty creeping in. Vincent's gaze softened for a moment, but only briefly. I need you to stay focused. I need you to watch carefully. There are people in this family, Jasmine, who might be more dangerous than you realize. And I need to know where you stand. I need to know if you're ready for what's coming. His words hit her like a wave, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to freeze. It was one thing to be involved, to make decisions alongside him, but it was another thing entirely to be asked to be a part of something so complex, so filled with danger. Jasmine took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had already made her choice when she decided to work with Vincent. But now, with this new weight on her shoulders, she understood that there was no turning back. I'm ready, she said, her voice unwavering. I'll do whatever it takes. Vincent studied her for a long moment, as if trying to gauge the depth of her commitment. Then, with a small nod, he spoke again. I knew I could count on you, he said, his voice softening slightly. But this isn't going to be easy. It never is. But you're not alone. I'm with you. Jasmine felt something shift inside her. It wasn't just the words, though they were reassuring. It was the certainty in his voice, the understanding. That they were in this together. For the first time, she realized that she wasn't just following orders. She was actively shaping her destiny. Vincent turned to face the desk, and Jasmine followed him, the weight of the conversation settling over her. We've always played it smart, Jasmine, he said, looking over some documents. But there's a time for caution and a time to act. We can't wait for the storm to hit. We need to make the first move. Jasmine nodded. What do you need me to do? I need you to help me plan our next steps, Vincent said, handing her a folder filled with confidential documents. We need to strengthen our position, and I trust you to make sure we're not caught off guard. As she looked down at the papers in front of her, Jasmine couldn't help but feel the magnitude of what she had agreed to. She was no longer just a passive observer. She was an active participant in the DeLuca family's future, and the road ahead would be anything but easy. But as she looked up at Vincent, standing there with the same determination that had brought him this far, Jasmine knew one thing for sure. She was ready. The decision had been made. The path was clear. And now, it was time to take the next step. The atmosphere in the DeLuca mansion had changed. What had once been a quiet, controlled environment now felt charged with a new energy, an undercurrent of tension that seemed to hum through the halls. Jasmine could feel it every time she walked past Vincent, every time they exchanged a glance. The decisions they were making were no longer small. They were shaping the very future of the DeLuca family, and every move they made had consequences. The weight of it all was starting to settle on her shoulders. She had known from the moment Vincent had asked for her help that her life would never be the same. But now, as she stood at the center of the storm, she realized just how far she had come. She was no longer just a maid. She was someone Vincent trusted, someone who had earned her place in this world. But with that came responsibility, and the pressure was building. The trust Vincent had placed in her was not something she could take lightly. It wasn't just about decisions anymore. It was about loyalty, power, and protecting everything they had worked for. Every time Vincent called on her, every meeting, every plan they discussed, she could feel herself being pulled deeper into this world. It was no longer just a job, it was a life. One night, after a particularly long day of meetings and discussions, Vincent called her to the study again. When she entered, she found him standing by the window, his back to her. The room was dimly lit, but there was a sense of finality in the air. Jasmine's heart raced as she stepped closer. Jasmine, Vincent said, his voice steady but carrying an intensity she had come to recognize. It's time to make the move. The words hit her with a sense of finality. They had been talking about this moment for weeks, planning their next steps. But now it was real. The storm they had been preparing for was finally here. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice calm, though her pulse quickened. Vincent turned to face her, his expression unreadable but serious. "I need you to be ready for anything. There are people who are going to test us. They'll try to undermine us, to take what's ours. And we need to stay one step ahead." Jasmine nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The moment she had been dreading and anticipating at the same time. The DeLuca family's empire was about to face a challenge like no other, and she was right in the middle of it. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm with conviction. "I trust you," Vincent replied, his eyes meeting hers with a rare sincerity. He stepped closer to her, his gaze softening just for a moment. "This won't be easy, but I know you can handle it." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy cloak, but there was something else in them, a confidence, a belief in her that she had never expected to feel. And yet, it was there, in the way he spoke, in the way he looked at her. She wasn't just a servant anymore. She was part of the plan. Vincent walked over to the desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a file. He handed it to her, his expression serious. "This is what we're up against," he said. "They've been making moves behind our backs, trying to manipulate the situation to their advantage. We can't afford to let them succeed." Jasmine opened the file, scanning the documents inside. It was a list of names, businesses, and transactions, connections that could threaten the DeLuca family's influence. She had expected this, but seeing it laid out in front of her made it feel more real. The magnitude of what they were dealing with hit her all at once. "We need to be strategic," Vincent continued. "Every decision we make from here on out will determine our future. There's no room for mistakes." Jasmine nodded, absorbing everything he said. She wasn't just following orders anymore. She was helping to shape the future of the DeLuca empire. And with that power came a responsibility she hadn't fully grasped until now. She was in it, fully, completely. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady. Vincent looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're already part of it," he said. "I'll need you to be there, every step of the way. We'll face them head on. No more hiding. No more playing it safe." His words rang in her ears. No more hiding. No more playing it safe. It was exactly what she had been avoiding for most of her life. But now, as she looked at Vincent, she understood. There was no turning back. She was already in this world, and there was no way out. Jasmine felt a strange sense of empowerment, the weight of the responsibility, but also the clarity that came with it. She wasn't just following Vincent's lead anymore. She was taking charge alongside him. She was part of this. "I'm ready," she repeated, this time with more certainty. Vincent nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "Good. Let's make sure we're ready for what comes next." The storm was here, and Jasmine Carter was no longer just a passive observer. She was an active player in this world, and whatever came next, she would face it head-on, alongside Vincent. Together. The tension in the DeLuca mansion had never been as palpable as it was now. Jasmine Carter had become more than just a part of the family business. She was now at the very center of it. Each decision she made alongside Vincent DeLuca had far-reaching consequences, and it seemed like every day, the stakes grew higher. But as the weight of the responsibility settled on her, there was a part of Jasmine that felt exhilarated. She had always been in the background, following orders, never questioning her place. Now, she was shaping the future of the DeLuca empire. It was more than she had ever imagined. The plan they had discussed, the strategy they had worked out, was beginning to unfold, and with each passing day, the pieces fell into place. But there was something unsettling about the sense of inevitability that came with it. They were moving forward, yes, but at what cost? Jasmine had learned to trust Vincent's judgment, his ability to see what others missed. But as their power grew, so did the risks. One evening, after a particularly long day of planning, Vincent called Jasmine to the study. When she entered, she found him staring at a map of the city. His face was unreadable, but there was an intensity in his eyes that told her something significant was about to happen. "Jasmine," Vincent said, his voice low, "we're about to make our move." Jasmine's pulse quickened. They had talked about this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, it felt more real than ever. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart raced in her chest. Vincent looked up from the map, meeting her gaze. "I need you to stay sharp. Things are about to get complicated, and I need you by my side. This isn't just about business anymore. It's about keeping what we've built." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Jasmine understood what was at stake, but hearing him say it out loud made everything feel more urgent. "I'm ready," she said, her voice unwavering. Vincent nodded, his expression softening just slightly. "I know you are," he said quietly. "And I trust you, more than anyone else." The sincerity in his words sent a wave of warmth through Jasmine, but it also reminded her of the responsibility she now carried. She wasn't just a trusted advisor anymore. She was a key player in the DeLuca family's future. As Vincent laid out their next steps, Jasmine listened intently, absorbing every word. They were moving quickly now, making decisions that would secure their position and eliminate any threats to their power. She could feel the weight of the choices they were making, but there was no turning back. This was the life they had chosen, and there was no room for hesitation. As they made their plans, Vincent occasionally turned to Jasmine for her input, his trust in her growing with each decision. It was a feeling Jasmine had never experienced before, being part of something so big, so dangerous, and so powerful. But with that feeling came an unease she couldn't shake. The world they were operating in was far from predictable, and despite the confidence Vincent had in her, Jasmine couldn't help but wonder if they were making the right choices. Would they come to regret these decisions? Would the cost of their actions outweigh the rewards? The uncertainty was always there, lurking beneath the surface. As the days passed, Jasmine and Vincent grew closer, their bond strengthening with each challenge they faced. They worked late into the night, strategizing, negotiating, and making decisions that would impact the DeLuca family for years to come. But it was in the quiet moments, when they weren't talking business, that Jasmine felt a deeper connection to Vincent. There was something in his eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't expected, something that made her feel as though they were in this together. But even as their connection grew, Jasmine couldn't ignore the feeling that something was about to change. The world they were navigating was volatile, and at any moment, everything could shift. Vincent had taught her how to stay focused, how to make decisions in the face of uncertainty. But now, Jasmine was beginning to realize that it wasn't just about strategy and power. It was about something more. It was about loyalty, trust, and the people who stood by you when the world seemed to be falling apart. She had chosen this life, chosen to stand by Vincent, but she hadn't fully understood the cost until now. One evening, as the city lights flickered outside the window of the study, Vincent turned to Jasmine, his eyes serious. "We're at a crossroads," he said. "There's no going back from here. What we do next will determine everything." Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the point of no return. She wasn't sure what Vincent had planned, but she knew one thing for sure. She would follow him, no matter the consequences. "I'm with you," she said, her voice steady. Vincent nodded, a small but appreciative smile playing at the corner of his lips. "I know," he said softly, "and I'll never forget that." The path ahead was uncertain, but Jasmine knew one thing. She was no longer just a bystander in this world. She was an integral part of it, and whatever came next, she would face it with Vincent by her side. The DeLuca family's future was at stake, and together, they would decide what came next.